Many thanks for your kind invitation. Many thanks for CAIA to invite me and to give me this opportunity to talk about a topic which is for me very interesting, which is about the diaspora and the challenge of Armenian state building. I apologize for my Franglish, my very bad English. As a French people, we have some difficulties to express ourselves in the Shakespeare language. So I do my best to make me understandable. I would like to start by making some observations. First of all, as you know, Armenia, since its independence in 1991, has emptied itself of its vital forces, as it has lost about 1.5 million people in 30 years. And the question is, did this massive immigration benefit the diaspora? The answer is no, because we cannot compare the immigration with the inter-diaspora flows of Armenians from the Middle East, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Cyprus, Iran, to Europe and North America, as the current immigration we saw for 30 years. So there is a structural fragility of the diaspora. Diaspora is suffering from a banking relationship with Armenia, and the problem is that its relationship with Armenia has never been a win-win situation. On the contrary, it starts on a bad basis, because we can notice two things which characterize this relationship. Is first of all the humanitarian and assistantship, and as well tourism. So during the war, the 44-day war, we show that the share of the Armenian fund, for instance, and Armenian diaspora help was something representing 5% of the state budget of Armenia, which is a symbolic thing. So as a general rule, aid from diaspora structures basically is a kind of a drop in the bucket compared to the main international donors such as IMF or World Bank. In September 2021, the High Commissioner of Office for Diaspora Affairs announced the second iteration of e-courts program, which attracts each year dozens of Armenian professionals from around the world, who are eager to share their skills in several ministries and offices of the Republic of Armenia. So although this is a small in scope, this is very laudable initiative, because it has a revolutionary dimension with the diaspora. Until now, the links between, because thanks to this initiative, e-course program, there is a kind of organic and horizontal relationship between Armenia and Armenian communities around the world. Until now, the links between Yerevan and Armenian diaspora communities around the world have been based primarily on two pillars: humanitarianism and philanthropy on the one hand, and tourism, be memorial or recreation on the other. And my purpose is to try to make a critical perspective about the 30 years since independence between Armenia and diaspora. Since the 1988 earthquake, it has been clear that the mobilization of the diaspora in favor of Armenia has taken place intermittently on a transnational scale every time a tragedy rocks the motherland. This was the case at the time of the earthquake, which opened the doors of the Iron Curtain, then the first Nagorno-Karabakh war, and the 2020 Artsakh war, which gave rise to a digital diaspora. The fact is, there is a shaky relationship with a strategical potential. However, there were such of enthusiasm at the beginning of the 90s with Armenian independence. There were also a chaotic context: war, shortages, and energy crisis. And in those crucial first years, however, Levon Tel-Petrosyan's new government did not reach out to the global diaspora to determine their role and responsibility in the state building process. Instead, he embarked on an open conflict with the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, Dashnak, which at the time was had one of the best network. It was the largest diaspora network, and after all, he banned this party. So the establishment also of the Hayastan or Armenian Fund met the most urgent needs. It made it possible to channel and professionalize aid without triggering impact investments in other sectors of the economy. However, the independence for which the political organizations of the diaspora were not prepared, still fearing an attack by Turkey, reset the paradigm of the Armenian diaspora relationship. Until then, the link to Armenia had been established through an intermediary, because during the Soviet era, there were committee or pro-Soviet Armenian community structures in the diaspora, making a link, establishing a link between communities and on the one hand and the motherland. There were, since the late 1950s, trips to Soviet Armenia under the restrictive framework of the Intourist Agency, which was heavily controlled during that time. So independence of Armenia changed the model, the paradigm of the Armenian diaspora. We went from a stateless diaspora, like Palestinians, like Kurds, or Assyrians, Chaldeans, to a state-linked diaspora, like Jewish diaspora, with Israel, Irish diaspora, Lebanese diaspora. However, unlike other countries with a strong diasporan tradition, such as Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Armenia did not establish during the first 20 years of its independence a consultative body or a political institution devoted to its national or its compatriots beyond its borders. So there is no, until today, an organic structure we can walk and make some Armenians, diasporic Armenians represented in Armenia. As well, in the 1990s, in the absence of legislation allowing dual citizenships, there were no, for instance, it was very hard for Armenians from diaspora to get citizenship. They were just granted 10 years residence permits. And these factors make the gap between Armenian and diaspora more wide. So so after Levante Petrosyan dismissed, his successor Robert Kocharian was more open to the organization of to the IRF, the Dashnak Suchun Party, because he left the ban. And he also appointed Vartan Oskanyan, who was an Armenian American from Syria, as foreign affairs minister. He was eager to attract investment and from diaspora. So he organized the first major pan-Armenian diaspora conference in 1999, which did not lead to anything concrete, except for grand declarations of little substance. At that time, the Armenian diaspora relationship was headed by the foreign ministry. There was an agreed upon some kind of division of labor, where the diaspora focused on the fight for international recognition of the Armenian genocide, while the Armenian state piloted the internal affairs of the country without interference from Armenian abroad. So this was the paradigm which started at the beginning of the 20s, after Robert Kocharian came to the office in 1998. Serge Sargsyan, who came to power amid the tragedy of March 1, 2008, was the one who set up a ministry of diaspora, which he entrusted to Ranush Hakopian. She was, as you know, a former communist leader, a Komsomol leader, who had little knowledge of the realities within diaspora Armenian communities. Its policy was inspired by the Soviet-era diaspora committee, which was working during the 60s, 70s to help Armenian communities around the world. She practiced discourse imbued with old-fashioned patriotism, but she developed also several programs to create synergies among different professions, among Armenian doctors, writers, journalists, jewelers, etc. Her ministry played also a significant role in accompanying and supporting the tens of thousands of Armenians from Iraq and especially from Syria who settled in Armenia fleeing war. So there is a mixed opinions about Ranush Hagopian action, but what was important is to point out that when the Velvet Revolution, the so-called Velvet Revolution, set up in 2018, it brought about a cosmetic change and a profound rejuvenation of the ministry, because we assist to the rise of a new generation who came to power in Armenia. And as you know, the next minister, Michital Ayrapetyyan, was only 20 years old when he succeeded Ranush Hagopian. But as like Ranush Hagopian, he ignored the complexity of diaspora Armenian communities, their fragmentation, their challenges, their complexity. So he was inspired by the Israeli model of startup nation. And he wanted to believe with his team that Armenia can attract young entrepreneurs from the diaspora. For this, he developed what will be one of his best successes, the Nerouge program. Nerouge program was a program who catch up young entrepreneurs from diaspora to create their own startup in Armenia. Then, as you know, Nicole Pashinyan administration closed the ministry and replaced the ministry by a high commissioner's office due to budgetary constraints. And it was seen from Middle Eastern Armenians especially, but not only, as a mark of little consideration that Prime Minister Nicole Pashinyan gives to the strategic dimension of the diaspora. So the question is that we, during 30 years, Armenia has become something like a tourist homeland in the eyes of many visitors from across the Atlantic and Europe. Many diasporans view Armenia as a place to do humanitarian work in villages next to the boundary, the frontier, or to be baptized in a monastery. And that's where the engagement begins and ends, because philanthropy remains at the heart of the relationship. Philanthropy, I mean foundations like or organizations, well-known organizations like AGBU, like Aznavour Foundation, like Howard Karagosian Foundation or Lindsay Foundation, Kafesjan Family, etc., etc. But the absence of foresight and consultation between the actors in Armenia and the diaspora deprives these dynamics of their development. Of their strategic significance, because they were until now a lack of a strategic vision to the future of Armenia as a statehood, and not just like as a homeland. We saw also mutual disinterest on essential subjects in diaspora. There were no topics debated like socioeconomic issues, development, and especially demographic security, demographic and cyber security, etc. So all of this leaves most work related to the international recognition of the genocide. They were just most focused on the Armenian international recognition of the genocide instead of thinking about Armenian demographic and Armenian security and the professionalization of Armenian state institutions. The other thing that I would like to point out is the mutual ignorance, which has resulted in two neglected areas. Diaspora institutions themselves and diaspora studies in Armenia are really weak. So there's a little effort in the 90s and 2000 to develop Armenian center of research, Armenian history of diaspora inside universities. So there were a huge lack of interest in this, the area of diaspora studies in Armenia. When we are studying diaspora, Armenian diaspora is the most of kind of anthropology or an ideological approach focused on the idea of conserving Armenian identity, which we call Ayabahbanum. Of course, fortunately, there were little exceptions. For instance, you have the case of the Diaspora Center at Haigazan University in Beirut, in Lebanon, which mainly focuses on Middle Eastern communities. But there are no research centers worthy of the name today until now. So the main idea is to keep in mind that philanthropy is essential, is very important, but it's not enough. It's not enough. Just as the Armenian Virtual College at AGBU will not compensate for the loss of Melkonian High School in Cyprus. So there is also a need to understand the policy of the political parties of diaspora. While the diaspora is not a physical entity, diaspora has never fully realized itself. It has missed important dates also with history. For instance, in 1998, the three traditional parties, Dashnak Suchun, Henshagian, Ramgavar parties, expressed opposition to independence. But not because they were not believing they're not wishing independence, but they were fearing that Armenia could not face the pan-Turkic danger on its own. As for the role of traditional political parties, time has shown that their programs have not been successful. There is no non-existent in diaspora, apart from a few associations. The Henshak have no audience in Armenia. The Ramgavars have suffered from multiple splits, but retain a certain renown among the Armenian intelligentsia, thanks mainly to its unofficial organ, the Ask Daily newspaper. As for the IRF, Armenian Revolutionary Federation, decades of compromise with the kleptocratic regime of Kocharian and Sargsyan led to the failure of many of its foundational principles. So the driving out of power by the Velvet Revolution, they aligned themselves with Kocharian's Armenian alliance in the June 2021 parliamentary elections. So the fact that they are aligned with Kocharians and supporters has led a lack of influence in Armenia and diaspora circles. Then there is, for instance, during this Seljuk regime, in exchange for a few ministerial posts and regional governorships, Dashnak Suchun hasn't managed to make its to establish an agenda for Armenia, for the future of Armenian statehood, as well as for the future of diaspora. So they were more in a logic of of Haitadism, but without strategical vision. So another silent fact is that the traditional parties and their structures, for the most part, have not been able to accompany the sociological changes of their respective communities by integrating the driving forces of the new immigration from Armenia. So therefore, the gap between the new migration, the new diaspora coming from Armenia after the 1990s, and the traditional diaspora, the transnational community, so has widened. This gap has widened. So this is a fact, and that's why diaspora become more weak. So the problem, the challenge of the future of this relation is to face the gradual loss of sovereignty and increased dependence on Moscow, from Yerevan to Moscow, because the only alternative for Yerevan is, because due to the geopolitical crisis, Armenia is suffering a very weak position after the war, is to diasporize Armenia instead of making more close to Russia. Unfortunately, to this date, quite the opposite has happened. Great human resources left the country under Levante Petrosians and Seychelles regions, and Armenia is lacking human resources. So there is a vital emergency for the survival of the state to catch up more human resources from the diaspora. First, there is so I'm talking about the demographic factor, and this is not a coincidence that the Future Armenia initiative talk about repatriating 50,000 families, because it is still necessary to put in place a new dynamic of repatriation. But for this aim, it is also necessary to get infrastructures to guarantee the stability, the sustainability of this repatriation. Armenia was perceived as a springboard for 2/3 of the Syrian Armenians that came only to live again for other destinations in the West. And it is not the NGO Report Armenia, which all is good while, that will succeed alone. Hence, we must change something. So, to change this paradigm, it's up to the Armenian elites to grapple with the issue of reforming the state and its institutions. It is mainly a question of systematizing the political participation of the elites of the diaspora in the development of the country. Until now, the model has focused on lobbying and memorial politics. International recognition of the genocide instead of international recognition of Artsakh. The effort carried out for the recognition of Artsakh undertaken by the community in the United States at the beginning of the 2010s arrived too late, and because Armenia failed this battle, this diplomatic fight. And during this time, the Armenian state sank into an inexorable authoritarian rift with the capture by Sargsyan's clan of all the levers of the power. To make this new relationship, Armenian diaspora relationship, strategic, Armenian institutions will have a lot to gain by becoming more complex, which inevitably requires better integration of the diaspora into state institutions. So the political participation of the diaspora can, at this stage, take the form of election, for instance, by direct universal suffrage of Armenian MPs, by Armenian nationals abroad. Is something which exists now, for instance, in France, following the reform of the French Constitution of July 2008, and taking advantage of the redistribution of 2010 legislative constituencies, they were created abroad to allow French people living outside France to elect deputies to the National Assembly. So now in France, we have 11 deputies, MPs, who are elected by two-round system, and they have the same powers as the deputies elected on French territory. And they were first elected in 2012 legislative elections. The same is in Portugal. The large Portuguese diaspora is represented in Lisbon via two institutions. We have the Council of Portuguese Communities, the CCP, made up of 80 members who are elected for a 4-year term. And we have also a consultative council called Diaspora Council, founded in 2012 And the first is grouped around several thematic areas, such as economy, society, migratory flows, teaching the national language. And the second is an advisory structure, whose members scattered around the world, who have the task of promoting a network of professional contacts between Portuguese or Portuguese origin people in the field of economy, culture, science. So they are making lobbying for Portugal. There is also a state secretariat for Portuguese communities within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which acts as the supervising ministry. So it was created in 1980, and this is an institution who listen and dialogue between the Portuguese government and its diaspora. So we cannot notice the same in Armenia. However, there is some effort from the High Commission, but we cannot do a comparison. This office was a consultative body of the Portuguese government, made up of representatives elected by immigrant associations. Is based on the force of appeal and the central role that associations have in the construction and preservation of immigrant communities. In more recent history, the Greek state, Greece, made amendments to its constitution and added some mechanisms for engaging with its diaspora. The Greek constitution of 1975 referred for the first time to the Greek diaspora as Hellenism that requires interest throughout the Greek state. In 1983, they established a General Secretariat of Hellenism abroad as the mission of catering to Greeks abroad in the field of education, conferences, cultural events, and coordinating and organizing state diaspora policy. In 1995, Greece created the Council of Greeks Abroad, with its headquarters are based in Thessaloniki, the second city of the country. This institution also played a relevant role in the aftermath of the collapse of communism, when the Greek state was dealing with the issue of repatriating Greeks from the Soviet Union. For instance, there were a small Greek community in Armenia who was repatriated in the 1990s. There were Greeks also in Albania who benefit from this policy. So to note that, like in Armenia currently, there is no right for Greeks abroad to vote for national elections. And since the 1970s, diasporan voting behavior traditionally has been clientelist and party politicized, based on the party-funded transportations or voters, etc. So as such, diasporan vote was divided among Greeks, diasporic Greeks, between the two big parties, the PASOK and the New Democracy. So taking into account the immense potential of the diaspora and the skills it represents in terms of human resources and impact investments, it is up to us to wonder about years of inertia that could have been used to develop meaningful projects in the mutual interests of both sides of the Armenian world. It is deplorable that until now, the Armenian Ministries of Education and Foreign Affairs have not set up an Armenian satellite TV channel in English, in French, Russian, or in Turkish, on the one hand, or a channel that can promote the Armenian language and culture in its two linguistic variants, Western and Eastern Armenian, or why not in the Hamaink dialect, to address Islamized Armenians, on the basis of which is now like BBC World or TV5 Monde channel, which promotes the Francophonia to the French-speaking world. So the last gap in the Armenian diaspora relationship is the absence to date of the equivalent of British Council or Goethe or Confucius Institute to promote the Armenian language and culture in a non-community framework and relieved of all ideological or localist consideration. The other idea, which I would like to share with you, is the project of a Senate for the diaspora. To strengthen its democratic base, Armenia would have everything to gain by creating a Senate made up of dignitaries or civil society actors from diasporan communities. Personalities could be appointed or elected on the basis of skills and geographic origin by the President of the Republic of Armenia, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the National Assembly, etc. It could allow Armenia to move forward on strategic issues. Let us imagine a recognition of Artsakh by the Senate, for instance, the upper house, which is part of a validation process of the two chambers, and the consequences that this would have in terms of advancement for the Armenian cause. If the question of the voting system and the mode of representation remains unknown, a project of such magnitude will lead to a wave of emulation within the diaspora itself, where the structures of representation are struggling to democratize their functioning. Just as Armenia saw its civil society take power in 2018, yes, it has yet to undergo the transformation necessary to consolidate its state. Diaspora alone cannot affect meaningful change without a clear roadmap from the center. One thing is certain, however, its contribution to the future of Armenia can only be effective if a policy of restocking and encouraging repatriation, well, we are talking about demography, in the short and medium term, makes it possible to create an environment conducive to business and strengthen the country with all the necessary social reforms that are needed. This strategic component can channel an immigration of skills to develop education centers of excellency in several fields, such as high-tech, hard sciences, but also the social sciences. Armenia is the only country in the former Soviet Union where there are 3 universities belonging to 3 distinct cultural spheres, American, French, and Russian. So Armenia sorely needs to know how, and this is an observation center per excellence. The fact that in the small country we have 3 different kind of universities. Armenia needs the know-how and methodology of diasporan experts. Armenia should focus on the agricultural and agri-food sectors in which France and the Armenian community have a long experience of know-how. So I can give you a little, if you want, examples of this win-win cooperation within France and Armenia. But let me talk just about democracy, because by streamlining the Armenian diaspora relations on the basis of mutual respect and reciprocal interests, it is up to Armenian civil society, whose inventiveness and talents have proven to contribute to the modernization of the Armenian soft power and diaspora. So we need a constitutive Armenian soft power. Thus, the idea of democracy must prevail alongside the ideal of patriotism anchored in the reality of the state over a messianic nationalism that unfortunately generates tragedies. Armenia must adapt because it has deprived of the fruits of victory, of the military victory of 1994, and Armenia now is entered in a new world of uncertainty and fragility. Uncertainty because it questioned its ability to meet strategic, political, technical, economic, health, social, and ecological challenges. Fragility because as it goes through a losing streak. So the question is to make draconian, decisive choices. A state cannot be built on amateurism, approximation, provincialism, fetishism, nor destructive imagination and excesses. So it's important to change the thought forward, to see Armenian diaspora as a network, not as communities, traditional communities. The diaspora is not a state, but a network. And the diaspora is not synonymous with community income. The diaspora cannot serve as a receptacle, receptacle for the importance of the Armenian political elites. The diaspora is not a single body. It is uncontrollable. It must be allowed to organize itself. And the other priority is economy. So I talk about the importance to build a strong state on services, agriculture, industrial, high-tech, etc. Unfortunately, Armenia lack, and this is the last point, proactive diplomacy, because its diplomacy significantly weakened after the Velvet Revolution. And it is obvious that the current administration preferred to employ people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who were obedient and who praised Pashinyan's administration instead of choosing people with high skills. So this is the issue must be addressed from the point of view that Armenians' human resources now lie outside the country. This, however, doesn't mean that the more Armenian exhausts itself, the diaspora will grow stronger. But there are professional journalists, political scientists, university students, diplomats even in the diaspora who can serve the interest of Armenian statehood. Recently in France, we see in the context of the Ukrainian war, we saw how President of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili, she is a French native with Georgian origins, former French diplomat that used become member of the MFA, the Foreign Minister of Georgia, and then the President of Georgia. And we saw how Georgians, even if they are not diaspora, they use this kind of skills to their own advantage. Even a weak state like Armenia has this leverage of the diaspora, but it does not use it for the benefit of its diplomacy, of its foreign policy. Therefore, I want to note that we are now facing two challenges. Either we will strengthen the state with elements of the diaspora, or we will continue the process of Russification of Armenia and become a Russian region, as Robert Kocharian mentioned when he said that we must create a unified state with Russia. So, concluding on an upbeat note, I think we must realize that Armenia has a diaspora factor as leverage, and we must understand this. Thank you very much for your attention.